there's always been, I think, this big perception of single traits having single functions, which isn't how a huge amount of biology works. For some, yeah, like eyes are used for seeing, they don't really do anything else. But I think there's a lot of, again, it comes down to a lot of the sexual selection stuff, but things like horns on Triceratops, that's probably quite good for fighting off predators, but it's also quite good for fighting other Triceratops. And then things like elephants dig with their tusks, as well as fight other elephants, as well as fight lions, as well as stripping the bark off trees. So you got to be very careful about how you think of functionality in two different ways. One way is, what possible things could that thing do? And what possible things could have been the main selective pressure before? So you think about elephant tusks, as I say, they do all these different things. But when an elephant's just got the tiniest little nubs, like the first elephant whose teeth have grown the wrong way and have pushed out of its jaw, and now it's got a couple of little spikes, it can't really dig a hole with them. It's certainly not digging for water. They're probably not great against a predator because you basically have to get on your knees to try and lean over and try and stab it a bit. But you can show off to the girls and you can immediately fight another elephant who's head-to-head the same height as you, and you've got a massive advantage. So evolutionarily, they probably started as some kind of sexually selected feature. But now, functionally, they are probably compromised by the fact that having the best fighting tusks, but also having the tusks that are best at digging up water to keep you alive during a drought, is putting selective pressure on that. And although sexual selection appears in both ends, those are two different things. Digging for water is critical, but it's probably not what started it. And I think that's where we get trapped with things like, say, the paddle tail of Spinosaurus or stuff like, or T-Rex arms. It's like, well, why are T-Rex arms like that? Well, maybe we need to consider what a slightly longer arm is like, or what it was being functioned for in its ancestors, or how it works in other species, or what else it might do, rather than every paper is like, did it do this, or did it do this, or did it do this? It's like, it could be all of them. That's a very different question to try and answer, but people don't tend to think of it. And it ends up being very binary. And again, biology is not like that because it's a compromise.
And it may be wiser to then look at the evolutionary origins, how it first sprung up.
What does a miniaturized version of this look like, and what might that function for, or how does it function in ancestral forms? A really good example of that is giraffe necks, which have been argued about. Forever and a day, it was giraffe necks are to help them feed up high. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's a couple of papers coming out going, actually, maybe it's sexual selection and competition. And then that drove down into arguments about, well, what does a short neck look like in the Okapi, its nearest relative, and what do short legs look like, and how do they work? And plus a whole bunch of other studies. And ultimately it came out that we were right the first time. This is all about feeding, but it's a really interesting way of thinking about it and looking at it.